Hello everyone, my name is Andy Hopper and I'm a Solutions Architect here at Shippo. Today, we're going to look at how you can use the Shippo SDK to integrate Shippo's services into your own application. For this video, we're going to use the SDK for C#, but we'll also have other videos in our channel for languages like Python, Node.js, and Java. Let's get started. I have here a standard console application for C# that I've created in Visual Studio Code. Obviously, your own application's code is probably going to look a lot different from this, but this will be a decent way to walk you through the process. The very first thing I'll need to do is add a reference to the Shippo SDK for C#. We publish our SDK to the standard NuGet channels, and all you'll need to do is search for the word Shippo. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose the latest version that we have published, which is 4.02 at the time of this video. Now that we've added our package, we're ready to start coding. In order to use the SDK, we'll need to create an SDK object. This is an object named Shippo SDK, and it's in the Shippo namespace. You'll need to supply an API token, which you can obtain from the Shippo API portal. In this case, I'm using a test API token that I generated, and I'm going to use for this sample. Okay, let's create a shipment. The shipment service is a child of the SDK object, and to create a shipment, we'll be calling the create method. One thing you might notice is that this method is async. This is the pattern you'll see in the C# SDK. We're making network calls here, so we've made them all use C#'s async await feature. Now, to create a shipment, you'll need at least three things: a shipper address, which we'll set in the address from property, a address to, which is the destination of the shipment, and then finally a list of the parcels that are going to compose that shipment. I'm going to use a little bit of Julia Child's magic here to fill all these out, and then we'll walk through what's in here. Okay, so I've done a bit of typing, and I've populated these properties. Notably, if you look at the address from and address to, these are just address objects that include name of the recipient or sender, street address. You can have street 1 and street 2. You've got city, state, zip, country, phone, email. You've also got the ability to supply company name, that sort of thing. Likewise, below, you'll see a list of the parcels that are going to compose this shipment. Now, in this case, I'm using metric measurements for the weight and the dimensions of the package, but you've got the ability to specify the units that you'll use. So if you want to, you can use imperial units such as pounds or yards and inches for those dimensions and weights. Now, we've created our shipment, so let's go ahead and log the ID of the object that we created. This is another common pattern you'll see in our SDKs. We assign unique identifiers, also known in .NET as GUIDs, to all the objects in our system. This is really handy to have on hand if you ever need to reach out to Shippo customer support. Okay, now that we've defined our shipment, it's time to go rate shopping. By default, Shippo will automatically return a list of rates in the shipment create response, but if you want to obtain your rates later, you can specify that you'd like the shipment creation call to be asynchronous. You can learn more about asynchronous calls in the API documentation. Now, in this case, what I'd like to do is go ahead and write out a list of the rates to the console. So go ahead and type that out here. And what I'm doing here is I'm spitting out the rate object ID. There's that object ID concept again. I'm putting out the name of the provider or the carrier that's providing the rate. I'm also generating the service level name. This could be ground, express, 2-day air, etc. Along with the number of days that the carrier estimates it'll take to deliver the package. And then finally, I'm writing out what the total amount that the carrier is quoting for that rate for this particular package. Okay, so to purchase a label for our shipment, we'll need to create what's called a transaction in Shippo parlance. Similar to a shipment, the create method takes a request object, and this object, at a minimum, needs a label file type and a rate that we want to use for the label. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose for label file type, it's an enumeration, and I'm going to choose PDF. And then for the rate itself, this should be the object ID of a rate that was quoted for this shipment. And in this case, I got it above when I did my create shipment call. But first, I need to select one of those rates. So what I'm going to do here is insert a line, and I'm simply going to write a link query against the rates that were returned by that shipment object. And I'm simply going to look at the local amount for each of those rates, and I'm just going to return the very first one that's less than $5. I'm just looking for a low price shipment. Once I've got that selected rate, I can go to this rate property and I'll set the selected rate's object ID. And then finally, I need to close off that and put a parenthesis there. Okay, let's see here. Let's fix up some namespaces and we should be good to go. All right, next, let's go ahead and write out the object ID of the transaction we just created. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that transaction or label generation may take a few seconds. So rather than make you wait on that transaction creation call to come back, we'll return a transaction object, but you need to look at the status property to see what the state of that transaction is. In this case, I'm checking to see if the transaction is in a queued state, and while it is remaining in that queued state, I'm simply using an async await call against task delay to wait a second, and then I'm just going to refresh the status of that transaction by just downloading it from the SDK again. All right, so at this point, we know our label has gotten out of the label generation queue, and I'm going to spare you a whole lot of typing. What I've done here is just pasted a code block. I'm going to generate a label name. I'm going to suffix label underscore with the object ID for our label or our transaction. I'm going to write out a line to the console letting us know that we are in the process of downloading it, and then I'm going to use the C# HTTP client to download this label. And what I'm using to download the label is a property on the transaction object called label URL. Once it is finished generating, once it's gotten into that success status, that label URL will contain the path that I can use to actually download, in this case, the PDF that I generated for this label. All right, so I've written quite a bit of code here. Now it's time to see this in action. All right, first let's make our console window a little bit bigger so we can see the output here, and then we're going to F5 it. All right, so we've created our shipment. We then printed out all the rates that we could find for that particular shipment. We then created a transaction, and while we waited for the transaction to complete, we then finally downloaded a label. So let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to paste this here, and let's see. And there we go. We have a PDF of our label for the shipment. Again, this is going to be the transaction ID followed by the .pdf. And you'll notice it's embossed with the sample do not mail watermark because I used a test API token. So what did we just do? Well, first we installed the Shippo NuGet package from the standard NuGet repository. Once we did that, we were able to create an instance of the Shippo SDK object, and in my case, I passed in a test token that I obtained from the API portal. Once we did that, we were able to create a shipment, passing the sender, destination, and the parcel weight and dimensions. And once we got a result back from that, we were able to shop for a rate for that shipment. Using that rate, we were able to create a label, also known as a transaction in Shippo parlance, and once we were sure that transaction had completed successfully, we were able to then download the label and view it. So what's next? Well, for you, you can go and get Shippo API credentials. If you haven't already created a Shippo account, just go to the URL here to create a Shippo account. It's free. Once you do that, you can navigate to the API portal and you can create your API tokens. And again, I recommend that you use a test token until you're ready to generate charges against your Shippo account. If you like, you can follow the sample code that we went through here in this video by going to our github.com/Shippo C# SDK demo URL. And then finally, if you want to see more about Shippo's APIs, you can go to our API reference listed here. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope to help you ship your packages soon.